So hello everybody, my name's Simon Cox. I'm Head of Development Management at Prologis and UK Sustainability Officer. Let's get the technology going. Marvellous, okay. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Head of Development Management and UK Sustainability Officer at Prologis in the UK. Very long title, as one of our customers told me recently, but effectively my job is anything technical in the world of construction associated with the development of new warehouses, including our sustainability strategy. And I'm blown away to be here today. I was here about 10 years ago, I think, and at the time it was a very different place. It was forklifts and dock doors and stuff that I probably, as a developer and a building expert, understood. I think now it's robots everywhere and everything's incredibly high tech. Loads of really amazing things. I don't know what many of them do, but they're really cool. Even down to the headphones here in terms of making the sound work, it's really great to see. So excited to be here. I think probably to kick off, my technical role, I think the technical aspect of it has probably given me a different view on sustainability to your typical corporate sustainability professional. And that's probably grounded more in the commercial, practical kind of construction reality rather than the specialist that now has emerged around sustainability. You know, people just doing a degree in sustainability, and that's all they ever do. And I think that, coupled with my role, has meant that I've been able to, over the last 16 years, experiment quite easily. So I've done quite a lot of different things and tried to see what works and what doesn't around warehousing and sustainability. So I'm going to sort of touch on a bit of that for you today, and try and sort of contribute to the debate around net zero in logistics. And within that, a sort of few questions come together. So, you know, what do we mean by net zero? Who decides what good looks like? What does the future hold for our sector? You know, where are we headed with all of this? And I think, for me, the key to it all is that sustainability and carbon footprinting are now absolutely mainstream. So just about everybody has a stake in the game now. So everybody's engaged in this in some way. I often use my mum as a barometer on these things, and when she starts talking to me about stuff, I know that it's absolutely out there. And what that means is that if everybody's engaged, everybody's got a different opinion, and there are hundreds of different opinions out there. Some of them at one end are based on pretty much pure emotion. At the other end, some of them are based on a really deep technical understanding of what's going on out there. But they're all opinions, and they're all valid, and they're all going to be heard. So I expect this subject to be a matter of really quite intense political and social debate in the coming years. And I think understanding that is probably central to the whole thing. So, moving on into the body of this thing, I'm going to talk about three areas. I mean, first of all, my sustainability journey at Prologis, you know, what I've done, what I've learned through that process. Secondly, to dip into the challenges and the controversy that I see out there right now, and to cover that a little bit. And then thirdly, what the future holds. And I'm not going to talk about the kind of 50-year future with hover cars and everything's done by drones, although that doesn't seem like it's quite so far away looking around today. But I'm going to talk a bit more about what we are doing, what people like me are going to be doing in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, thank you. So, before delving into the subject, I think it's probably quite a good idea just to step back a little bit and go to the basics. So whenever corporate sustainability people like me are talking about sustainability, what we're using is the language of ESG. And ESG stands for environment, social, and governance. And I joined Prologis in 2006. And back then, we used to refer to this as the triple bottom line, or the three pillars of sustainability. And the analogy I used to use back then was one of a three-legged stool. And the idea, if you can visualize it, is that any successful business in the coming net zero world needs to have these three things in balance. So if one leg of the stool is wonky, it's all going to collapse. And so everything that a business does needs to be good for the planet, it needs to be good for people, and then the governance bit means it's got to make business sense. And if it doesn't make business sense, if it isn't value add, it's not going to be sustainable. It isn't going to continue. So Prologis, my employer, is what's known as a real estate investment trust, or a REIT, and we exist really to develop, own and manage very large industrial buildings, and we specialise in that sector. The main driver in that sector is scale. So everyone's trying to grow a massive portfolio, and our portfolio is one of the biggest that's out there in terms of the number of buildings that we own. And that works because organisations like us can create efficiency through scale, and that can give us competitive advantage. But actually the thing that we're really learning now is that it's all about customers. So the fact that we've got a huge amount of properties over many geographies means that our core customers might be in 20 buildings in different continents, and actually we can join up discussions with them as a major global corporate, and we can talk about a building in South America and a building in the UK with one voice, and that's hugely powerful. So that's really our business strategy going forward. And we follow what, back when I was at university, we called a vertically integrated model. So we start off by developing the sort of warehouses that we want to own, and then we move those into our portfolio, and then we manage that portfolio. So the whole thing joins up together. And that's a point of difference for us compared to other developers. So most developers look at development profit, and they measure themselves on that profit, which they would trade out of. They would sell a building as soon as it's let to a customer. And that's not us. We want to own our buildings long term, no defined end date. And that means that future-proofing of buildings benefits us directly. So every penny that we spend on constructing energy-efficient buildings and maximising technology in that area, best practice certifications like BREEAM, and managing our environmental impacts, that all benefits us directly because we will own these buildings in the long term. And that, happily for me, meant that really when it came to sustainability at Prologis, I was pushing an open door. So the strategy was not something that I found difficult to sell, it was something that everybody wanted. And as a result, during my time at Prologis, we've now developed more than 20 million square foot of buildings that are either rated BREEAM Excellent or Outstanding. So BREEAM Excellent is basically the top 5% of new buildings in the UK in terms of energy performance. And Outstanding is really the top 1%. And our portfolio, I'm pleased to say, is also almost entirely EPC A rated, which is another metric that talks about energy efficiency in these spaces. Thank you. Over the last 15 years, we've measured and reduced and mitigated embodied carbon, so that's carbon associated with construction, on 74 projects. That's everything we've built in that time. And working with partners like Planet Mark and the environmental charity Cool Earth, that program has protected almost 18,000 acres of rainforest, which was otherwise at risk of deforestation. And that's locked in about 4.8 million tons of CO2, which is about 5 times more than our emissions over that period. And we did all this for our customers, actually. It was for the people that rent our buildings, which most developers and owners would call tenants, and we call customers. And they're doing it. They're interested in these metrics now as an absolute basic requirement, because their customers are the general public, in many cases, and they're really onto this stuff. They want to know that they're transacting with the good guys. But actually the really sort of seismic shift, the fundamental change that I've seen in the last couple of years has been in the financial markets. It's been in investment. And if we can go one forward again, sorry, this thing's not working. And what we're finding now is that the financial markets are driving ESG. So for us, that is demonstrated by our green bond program. So green bonds are sustainable investments. So those of you with pension funds, if you tick the ethical sustainable investment box, it'll go into these sort of investments. And what we're doing with our green bonds is borrowing money secured against a portfolio of green buildings, conditional on us being able to spend that money on making them even better. So the money that we've raised goes towards our LED replacement program. So we're going back into older buildings and swapping out the lighting for LED. And it's also funding the retrofit of solar panels. So it creates a virtuous circle that's greening the estate, and we're borrowing at preferential rates as a result. And this graph is showing just one of our pan-European funds, where we've managed to secure 2 billion euros of funding since 2018, all through this green bond mechanism. So a very successful program for us. And we're working again. And last year we got some new recognition from His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, which was quite cool. So he has a new initiative called the Terra Carta, which is kind of like the Magna Carta, but brought to the modern age. So this is about establishing a contract between business and the environment. It's about valuing the environment and respecting what he calls natural capital. And as well as signing up to the charter, he asked us if we would apply for this thing, the terracotta seal, which is kind of cool. I managed to animate it, hopefully. And it was actually drawn by Sir Johnny Ive, who was one of the original iPhone designers. And we are one of 45 global corporates, which you see there, who hold that terracotta seal. And Prince Charles's idea is that we will go out and be the flag bearers for this natural capital philosophy, which is about putting people and the planet in balance with business drivers. And that's straight back to that definition of ESG that I spoke about earlier. So if that all sounds really great and happy and good, where is the controversy, I hear you ask? Or would if you didn't all have headphones on. Any of you that paid attention to COP26, which is where we received that terracotta seal, will have seen that it was pretty controversial. We saw Greta Thunberg, even before the conference had started, announce that it was a failure. And I think it's actually easy to see why she said that. There was something like 400 private jets, which our world leaders flew into Glasgow to talk about how we might act collectively to reduce our carbon footprint. And people like Leonardo DiCaprio arrived with Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, and sort of created a circus, I think, a media frenzy. And all of that started to cause questions, really, for people about, is this a serious conference? Is this something that's actually going to affect change? And the underlying argument, I think, is all about the direction of travel towards net zero and what happens in the next three decades, what that looks like and how it's going to affect us as people, as individuals. And to unravel that, I thought I would sort of just kick into what net zero actually means. So the first part of any net zero claim is a carbon footprint. And the first part of a carbon footprint is what we call a system boundary, which is that complicated little graphic on the left there. And the interesting thing about system boundaries is they define what's included in the footprint and what's not included in the footprint. And I think, tricks of the trade are that there are definitely organizations out there that use specialist language about these sort of boundaries to hide what is essentially a limit to their ambitions. They're not being bold enough, they're not being inclusive enough about what they put into that footprint. And the other thing I think it's good to be aware of is the length of time that you calculate the footprint over. So this is what we call the study period for those of us in the game. And these two little pie charts are representing different study periods for a warehouse development. And they're looking at the balance between embodied carbon, which is everything to do with the mining of materials, construction of a building, assembly on site, demolition, and then eventually clearance to reuse the site. And then the operational emissions, which is in dark green, and that's the energy use in the building. And then what this is showing is that depending on the study period that you choose, whether it's 30 years or 50 years, you get a very different impression of the split between the two of those. And I'm not sure there's a right or a wrong answer. The European Union are backing 50 years at the moment, and we're pivoting to that. But I put this there because it shows that the priorities can look very different depending on which horse you back in this race. And it's worth understanding what people have done there. The second thing I wanted to flag was really a redefinition of language that I think has occurred in the last 2 to 3 years around two very clearly now distinct terms. So carbon neutral and net zero. 5 years ago, these were pretty much interchangeable. And now, the reality is they both end up at the same place. They both end up at a place where net emissions are zero. But they get there in a different way, and that's something that gets people very, very excited right now. So first of all, carbon neutral, which is the graph on the left. To be carbon neutral, you just measure and mitigate your emissions. So this is representing a typical warehouse building. The green block is embodied carbon, the blue block is operational carbon emissions, and then the black bar, which drops down below zero, is mitigation. So that's somebody buying carbon credits to cancel out the emissions that they've created. And the problem with this that the world is seeing is that it's a standstill. it's not driving any systemic change. So nobody's actually doing anything to reduce their emissions. They're just going for business as usual. And then in the most cynical of viewpoints, they're buying their way out of trouble. And so what's happening is that the world is demanding more. And we move towards net zero. And net zero is kind of the same thing. You measure your carbon emissions, but you dramatically reduce them. And so this is showing the green bar having been reduced by 20% because the developer's been good and they've managed out carbon from the construction process. The blue bar is all but gone. It's dropped down below zero, which represents somebody putting a great big renewable energy installation on this building so that it can be off-grid for its lifespan. And then as a consequence, the black bar reduces in scale. It's much smaller because the carbon footprint that you're trying to mitigate is much smaller. And I would say the net zero thing is objectively better because that drive to reduce carbon bakes in systemic change. It forces people like me to change their habits for good, and it reduces the reliance on carbon credits. And the problem with carbon credits is it's very difficult to know what they're doing because usually they're on the far side of the world. We can't see them. They involve things that are not very tangible. And if you compare them with stuff that you can see locally here in the UK, like green roofs or solar panels or wind turbines, they're just not accessible enough to people. And the other aspect of net zero that matters is that the credits that you use are all nature-based, and that means that they're, in the new buzzword is regenerative. So they're all about things that are going to continue to deliver carbon savings in the long term, and not just sort of short-term corrections of problems. Yeah, so you've got some new and emerging terminology. You've got some debate out there about what's good and what's bad. On the one hand, you've got people like Greta Thunberg who want to change our economic system to get to net zero. But on the other hand, you've got a very different approach starting to emerge from people like this chap, Mark Carney, so who you recognise as the former governor of the Bank of England. But Mark Carney is now UN Special Envoy on climate action and finance. He's also head of transitional investment at Brookfield Asset Management. And in this context, transitional investment is the transition to net zero. So Carney is representing the financial world, seeing net zero as an opportunity. And he believes, as this FT article was suggesting, that very soon that carbon offsetting market will be worth about $100 billion per year. And he is backing that, and he's trying to build a global scale capability around that. He's representing at the moment a network, a consortium of investors that is essentially saying they are standing ready now to deliver the finance that we will need to get to net zero by 2050. So that's just an amazing shift in the way that our financial sector works, and something that I never really expected to see happen so quickly. But it's not all plain sailing. So there is controversy, and there are emerging all sorts of different viewpoints. And I think it's not clear at this point that the general public, us, really understand everything that's going to be asked of us as a way of contributing towards this net zero future, both financially and socially. And I think part of that is because the future is not clear. Is it a future where we have to switch all of our appliances off and we can have hot water for an hour a day? Or is it a future where we have abundant clean energy? And until that's clarified, we're going to see people swoop in and start a populist debate. So that's what Nigel Farage is doing now and was talking about here, calling for a referendum on net zero to see if we really want it as a people. And the problem there is, what actually are we asking of the people? So having touched on the controversy, let's turn to the future and this near future. What am I going to be doing next when I go back to the office? And I think the one thing, regardless of any controversy, that's abundantly clear is that people want to have net zero carbon buildings, and that is already there, that's already happening. And happily, we've got a definition for that. So the UK Green Building Council very kindly, with their members, have gone away and written this thing, their net carbon buildings framework definition. And what this does is really identify two areas that are going to be the stamping grounds of the debate for people like me. The first one of those, we can go forward a slide, please, thank you, is the reduction in embodied carbon. And this is a photo of the inside of one of our spec-developed warehouses. And I put this there to just really draw attention to the fact that reducing embodied carbon at significant scale is not going to be very easy for these sort of buildings. And that's because when you dig into it, steel and concrete, they are the right tools for the job in terms of creating these very tall, very large scale, very open plan, long lasting structures. There are other things out there, and developers like me, we really are going to have to try and push the envelope as to where we go with those. But they all come with their own problems. Things like glue laminated timber, hempcrete, sheep's wool insulation, straw bale construction. We've looked at them all, and they've all got merits, but they've all got challenges. You know, how do they perform in a fire? What will insurers think about them? How will it affect the way that our customers can use these buildings? And I think all of those questions, if we can go to the next slide, are why, for me, the mitigation, that black bar on the graph that I showed you earlier, that's going to be around for quite a long time still to come. And for us, that mitigation is all about managing our unavoidable embodied carbon emissions, and we choose to support Cool Earth, as endorsed by Sir David Attenborough here, a great man, and we chose to use them 14 years ago because we thought their approach stood out compared to what was emerging then around carbon trading and carbon credits. They're a charity, and because they're a charity, everything that we give them goes straight to their activities on the ground. And we contrasted that to the sort of robust gold standard carbon credits that exist at the moment, even now, which often just make money for landowners and don't really consider the needs of indigenous people. And Cool Earth are very different to that and always have been, which is why we've stuck with them for so long. Their approach, in my opinion, offers a wholesale route to the complete preservation of the rainforest. I mean, they're actually showing us that that's possible. I did a talk like this a couple of years ago, and someone said, what are you going to do when there's no more rainforest to protect, when it's all safe? And you know, that is the archetypal nice problem to have. You know, I'll be delighted when we get to that point and we'll start doing something else. But let's get to that point first, was my answer. The rainforest and protecting it is about a huge amount more than just carbon emissions. It's about people. It's about biodiversity. Every acre of rainforest has an undiscovered species. You know, that the biodiversity within the rainforest environment and ecosystem, we just don't even understand its depth. It's about protecting people. It's about protecting the quality of our water. It's about protecting the quality of our air. And that's why I'm delighted that we were able to start there and that we've continued with that as our mitigation direction. So the second element of this sort of new future of net zero is the operational energy. And for warehouse buildings, that's essentially all going to be about rooftop solar. That is the most immediately viable technology that we have, and we have huge expanses of roof. Even though, as you see in this picture, we've got lots of roof lights to let daylight in, there's still plenty of roof to play with to put PV there. But it's not straightforward again. So there's a real mismatch between the demand for energy in our buildings, which at the moment is mainly for lighting, and the time when the solar is generating, which is during the day when you don't need the lights. But actually, walking around here today, I can see the future is going to change that. So all of these robots are all going to introduce new base loads that we're going to be able to take out with PV. So PV is just going to get more viable from this point. The other issues are just the state of our electricity grid. So it's near enough impossible to navigate the waters smoothly in terms of getting consent to connect PV. Even if you say you won't export it, the grid is still worried about the destabilizing loads when it switches on. And that slows us down. But we're getting through it. We are getting these schemes done. And this was our first net zero carbon operation building, which is in Daventry. It's got an EPC rating of A+, which is net zero carbon according to that government definition. And our customer here gets the benefit of a 1.4 megawatt peak solar array, which is what you see there. You can see that could be 3 or 4 times larger than that on the roof, but that's what they can use within this building. They get the benefit of that for a small B rent. And the good news is that this is viable, it's repeatable, it's scalable. We can do a lot of it. And we really need to. So this graph, I lifted this from an Ofgem report a couple of weeks ago, and it shows wholesale energy prices up until the beginning of August. And at that point, they'd increased 5 times. So back in March 21, they were about £50 per megawatt hour. Beginning of August, they were about £250 per megawatt hour. It's got worse. So as of last week, in Germany, they were running at £850 per megawatt hour, which is €1,000 per megawatt. And that was all about the deepening concerns out there around energy security. And we've got a new Prime Minister, I guess about now, if she's left Balmoral. And she's got big plans on this, so it'll be interesting to see where she goes. But the one thing that seems certain to me is that we need more cheap, reliable, widespread, decentralized renewables. So that's a good context for this, which is our latest net zero commitment, which we publicised, I guess, about a month ago. So it's reasonably hot off the press. And those energy requirements are the foundation of this. So the emissions from our business, so people like me and the offices that we have and our business travel and all that stuff, are actually really quite low. But the emissions from the buildings we own, which belong to our customers, but come from their businesses, are much higher. So those are actually about 100 times higher than our carbon footprint. So what we've done, which I'm amazed by and delighted, is we've voluntarily included those in our carbon footprint. So we're deciding for ourselves to define our carbon footprint as 100 times bigger than we might have done. And that's because we can see a future in which we can provide that energy and we can make it 100% renewable. And that will be a massive service for our customers, particularly in the face of all of this energy insecurity and chaos that we see out there. And what that means is an investment in renewables, not on a kind of landlord property company scale, but on a utility company scale. So as of the beginning of this year, Prologis had 285 megawatts of PV installed on our roofs around the world. That put us in the top 3 of solar providers in the States. So we were pretty big. It had taken us about 10 years to get to that point. But the new commitment is that within the next 3 years, we add another gigawatt, which is just incredible. And that will put us into one of the biggest solar providers in the world. And we're going to keep going at that sort of pace until we've got enough renewable energy to deliver all of our customers' demands. And we've hired a specialist team to do that. They all have energy company backgrounds, and they're tearing into this as we speak. And alongside that, we've also got an e-mobility team. And that their plan as well, between now and 2025, is to add 10 megawatts of electric vehicle charging. And again, that's going to continue. So Prologis, we've moved beyond just being a landlord to being a customer-focused business, and we're moving beyond that now to being an energy and an e-mobility business. So for someone like me who's been around the subject for 16 years and has sort of battled away trying to do his bit, it's an incredibly exciting time to be part of this enormous, huge-scale transformation. We're one of the first to do this. We won't be one of the last. This is, I think, the future for our sector. So we've made it almost to the end, so thank you. In summary, hopefully this gives you a bit of an insight into the journey that I've been on at Prologis, that we've been on as a business over what is now quite a long time, 16 years, and the changes that we've seen. A bit of a thought about all the controversy that's out there now, and hopefully you'll take away the fact that that's probably going to continue. It's going to be pretty interesting in the next few years. And then finally, what this immediate future, this next 5 to 10 years holds. This isn't the 2040 plan. This is what we're going to see now in terms of change. And I think it's going to be a really bumpy ride. I think there's no doubt about that. But I do think we're at a point of real change. That financial sector shift is just unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it. And that gives me real optimism about the future. And, we can all have our vision of the future, what we think that's going to hold. I mean, my personal vision at this point is that we do 3 things. We protect the world's rainforests, that we divert capital from the Western world to allow other countries to achieve our standard of living, but to do so without adding carbon. So that's what offsetting could achieve. And that we use technology to satisfy our demand for energy, that we don't go back to the Stone Ages and not use energy, but that we create a world in which we all have enough clean energy to live the right kind of lifestyle, that we would expect, and that has done so much good for us as a society. So thank you. Thank you all for listening. I hope you have a great day. Delighted to be here, and thank you again.